Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Georgiana Ulyarik, and I am the Frederick S. Eaton Curator of Canadian Art here at the Art Gallery of Ontario. We are gathered on sovereign Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee land, and we are very privileged and fortunate to share this land. Not long after I immigrated to Canada with my family, I was walking down Dundas Street, and I saw that the light poles along Dundas Street were covered with these banners. And of course, they were here because of the extraordinary project, Michael Snow project, that was a collaboration between the power plant and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Still, I think to this day, a historic and marvelous collaboration between these two great institutions. These banners have actually become collector's items. And I think that in the history of the AGO, it might be the only marketing material that we have ever produced to have actually turned into art. And in fact, one of them is signed, and in this way, I feel that a little bit of Michael Snow is here with us this evening. They are from a private collection, and we are so very thrilled to have them here, have a little bit of walking women with us. You might have walked by the AGO Bistro today. We just installed a vinyl of walking women, so who knows, maybe someone will start peeling them off, and they will also become some strange marketing art. I think that it speaks to this singular impact that Michael Snow had on the city and obviously continues to have. You are all gathered here today, and we are so very honored to celebrate this extraordinary life and work of Michael Snow. Since we made this announcement, we've received so many that we're going to host this event. So many emails have come through, and I want to share one with you that came from someone who cannot be with us this evening. It's the former director of the power plant, Gaetan Verna, and she says, "I so wish that I was not in a different country at this time. I keep fond memories of Michael Snow. He was such a supportive and thoughtful artist. Together with Peggy, they made a point of coming to see all of our exhibitions at the power plant and always accepted to contribute and exchange with us. During my 10 years at the power plant, he always accepted our many invitations and did it with integrity and purpose. He is a rare type of artist with endless generosity and unwavering support. My thoughts will be with you all. His passing is a big loss for Toronto and for Canada, and he holds a dear place in my heart. Most sincerely, Gaetan Verna." And now please welcome my very excellent colleague, Jim Shedden, who may or may not be the private lender of these banners.
I may be, but I realize there's a potential confusion because we have this system tonight where these slides are going to come up that will signal when we want the next speaker to come up. And it may be confusing because it may look like we made the film that you just saw. In fact, Laurie Kwasniak, who's with us here tonight, has made a new film, Fields of Snow. This is a trailer for it, and we'll be premiering it here on a Friday night at the Jackman Hall, and it's part 1 of 3. It's an epic film on Michael's life and work that what I've seen of it is spectacular. In the early 80s, I came under this spell of avant-garde film. I saw Michael's Wavelength, Standard Time, back and forth, and then a premiere of a new film, So Is This, in 1982, when I was a child. I didn't know Michael yet, but he was present to do a Q&A, and it just blew me away. I had one of those moments where I realized that it was clear that Michael understood the actual potential of film, which was to, in a nutshell, to treat film and to treat the camera as an analog of consciousness. And then so much material has come out of that. This, for whatever reason, because I was quite young, in a way that made perfect sense to me and led to a personal obsession with his work in film and other media, as well as other artists working along similar lines who are more compelled by philosophical and poetic concerns and less by narrative or documentary impulses. Without knowing Michael yet personally, I also realized how much So Is This reflected his voice, which the voice that I would get to know over the next 4 decades, brilliant and witty and impeccable visual and temporal instincts, but also courageous and hilarious. It's a hilarious film and a courageous film. And 11 years after seeing that film, I had the privilege of being involved in this project, the Michael Snow Project, as a curator, public programmer, editor, and documenter. It was the AGO's most intensive engagement with a single artist's work ever. By this time, I became fascinated with the polymorphous nature of Michael's work, his genius in all media. And then a few other collaborations followed. And during the pandemic, we had the honor at the AGO of working with Michael on his final project, my mother's collection of photographs, an impeccably and poignantly composed work so beautifully encapsulates Michael's aesthetic and his voice, not very different from So Is This, but creating a kind of beautiful frame for me. So thank you again for coming tonight to celebrate the work of Michael. Tonight, a number of Michael's friends, family members, and colleagues across various disciplines are going to share their memories of him. Some are with us today, and some will be represented by home movie footage by Mrs. Jane Levesque, Michael's aunt, and experimental films and documentaries by Laurie Kwasnick, Eldon Garnett, Michael Snow, Alexa Francis Shaw, and myself. So thank you again.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. When we were just kids, we called Michael Unc Mike, except for my mother, who called him, as she did since childhood, brother. When I had turned 6, my parents piled all of us, all 6 children, into our white 1964 Ford station wagon and drove us to Montreal. We never did road trips like this, so it was immediately apparent this was an auspicious occasion. We were going to Expo 67, where Michael's walking women's works were featured. At the time, we were living on the Downsview Air Force Base in PMQ housing, and Expo 67, as well as Michael's 1970 show here at the AGO, offered a window into another world. Our lives were constantly enriched by Michael's humor, his curiosity, his presence, and sometimes his presence. Michael brought music into our lives, literally in a cardboard box. One Christmas, we received a large carton of musical instruments, the kind you might buy for a junior band, cymbals, triangles, a pair of maracas, tambourines. Michael praised any sound we could get out of the instruments, no instructions required. Later, with the creation of the flight stop sculpture in the Eaton Center, people began to associate Michael with geese. However, to family, Michael was already known as the champion carver of Christmas goose. With our table stretched to accommodate 2 geese and 20+ people, goose carvers were stationed at each end of the table, and Michael jokingly turned the event into an annual goose carving duel. By the 1980s, Alec was on the scene, stealing our hearts. We often gathered at my grandmother's place, Mama, who you may know from Michael's recent book work, my mother's collection of photographs. Here, Mama would sometimes play the piano, pulling Schumann or Chopin from a huge stack of music scores, and Michael on occasion would play too. No instructions required. Mama taught us all music, and the lasting impact of her teaching was the passion for the piano. And I know this influenced Michael as well. as neither stopped playing until they were nearly 90 years old. Beyond life in Toronto, I think of the remote, isolated log cabin nestled high in the cliffs of Newfoundland's rugged west coast. I was fortunate to visit a few times over the years. Here, Michael would spend time watching the wind in the sky and the changes in the weather. This was thinking time. Imagine being in a place where the only sounds were wind, rain, or perhaps the rustle of Peggy turning a page in her book. The night skies offered spectacular views of the stars, and on occasion the northern lights. Sometimes we listened to the shortwave radio. Michael did the tuning, pulling sounds out of the ether, creating an abstract soundscape from static, drifting fragments of language and music. It was a solo concert, and in this setting, almost supernatural. In the last 2 years, when Michael's health faltered, he spent time at Bridgepoint Hospital. Bridgepoint was the perfect convalescent home for Michael, as the tower had offered huge windows and, much like Newfoundland, incredible views of the sky. Here he spent much time doing what he described with a laugh as experimental napping. So now I imagine Michael is somewhere out there in the atmosphere, his molecules floating on sound waves, forever continuing his newest experiment. Thank you.
For more than 30 of the 40 years that I knew Michael Snow, I had the privilege of making music with him in the band CCMC, with its changing and recurring other members and innumerable guest players. I also developed a cherished friendship with him. CCMC has always played non-idiomatic, free improvisational music. No standard form or style, no bars or beats to be counted, no set melody, keys, rhythms, or tempos, just freewheeling, spur-of-the-moment, intuitive musical creation with a focus on texture, timbres, coloration, and an array of orthodox and unorthodox effects. The no rules rule requires a different kind of listening and action rather than ideation, with a heightened sensitivity to and compliance with the form emerging from the collective psyche of the performers. It is also uniquely suited to the molding and structuring of time, free from the usual musical preconditions. Just the thing for an artist who created the film See You Later, Au Revoir, which takes the simple short act of a hurried departure and stretches it out to an engrossing 18 minutes. Or who, in the film So Is This, controlled the pace of his audience's reading of a witty, playful, humorous text by presenting it one word at a time with pauses and progress as the author would have them. Make any poet jealous. I learned how pervasive in his life was Mike's playing with time when I visited him during one of his stays in hospital towards what proved to be the end of his life. I'd arrived while he was eating his supper, and as we chatted, he kept looking past me. In reply to my query about this, he pointed out a clock on the wall behind me and said he was checking to see how accurate his estimate was of how long it would take him to finish off each of the courses on his tray. I'm not too sure just how apt the connection is, but I couldn't help thinking of my favorite quote of his about his art, which was up on the screen there in the trailer for Laurie Kwasnick's movie. Although she got it right, I'm misquoting here. I think up the rules of a game when it looks like I'm losing, I change the rules. I'd like to relate one other memory of Mike, this one pointing up how generous he was with his time and talent and how quick was his visual acuity. No surprise there. A CD of my solo sound singing, or oral sound art, to use another of my terms for it, was about to come out, but the label's cover art efforts kept falling short. I phoned Mike and asked if he could spare some time to have a look at the latest dud and consult about it. He readily agreed and invited me over to his place. When I showed him the proposed artwork, whose type design was perfect, but which had an utterly hopeless image, a blurry still of my face in performance captured from a video, he took one look, thought for a few seconds, and said, "Have them blow it up and pull the focus in here," indicating my mouth. Slide, please. This is how it turned out. I was one delighted little sound singer.
Good evening. Thank you, the Art Gallery of Ontario, Jim and Georgiana, for hosting this event and for the opportunity to speak this evening. The last time I stood on this stage, a few years back now, I referred to Toronto as the city of Michael Snow. In Toronto, we became accustomed to Michael's presence, not only because he lived here most of his life, but also because he left such an indelible mark on the city beyond gallery walls through his iconic public art. We were also privileged to have the opportunity, again and again, to revisit his multidisciplinary work through celebratory exhibitions and collection displays. But Michael was also at home in the world and a truly international figure, one who belonged to the New York experimental film and music scene of the 1960s as much as Toronto. It was during this time that Wavelength was created and first presented, and as Wavelength was such a groundbreaking film, it defined Michael's legacy in the United States. For decades, he was exclusively known as a filmmaker. In 2010, while an assistant curator of modern and contemporary art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, I invited Michael to conceive his first institutional solo exhibition in the United States. When interviewing for the position 3 years earlier, I was asked by the legendary director Anne Danancourt why Michael Snow was not better known as a visual artist outside Canada, and particularly in the US. That question planted the seeds of the exhibition Michael Snow Photocentric that took place at the museum in early 2014 when Michael was 85. From the beginning of our working relationship, Michael was warm, generous, and open to collaboration. During the 3 years we worked on the exhibition, I followed Michael around the world, where he was showing mostly recent works, including in Vienna for the Secession show. There was vigor and energy in his engagement with this late project. I remember one evening during the opening weekend of the exhibition in Philadelphia, he performed a 2-piano improvisational set with a musician half his age. At the end of the performance, Michael coolly and calmly took a seat and sipped his drink, while the younger musician, sweating and out of breath, remarked on Michael's surprising stamina at the piano. Much work still remains to be done in revealing to current and future generations of artists and art lovers how and why Snow's conceptual art transcends medium specificity, all while remaining generous towards the viewer, and also revealing his enduring influence beyond the city he called home. As Jay Hoberman concluded in his review of Photocentric in Art Forum in April of 2014, I quote, "Photocentric itself lives the impression that Snow wakes up every morning pondering the paradox of two-dimensional representation. Another artist might have gotten an entire gallery show, even a career, out of variations on nearly any of these pieces. It's confounding that none of the New York's major museums had yet given Snow a full-fledged retrospective," end of quote. Michael never ceased to surprise and amaze me, and will continue to do so, I'm sure. Photocentric made the cover of that Art Forum issue. And when I called Michael to congratulate him on this, what I thought was a new success, he chuckled and said, "I have already been on the cover of Art Forum. This is my second time." In fact, his first art forum cover was back in the summer of 1971 with Wavelength. Michael Snow has been and will continue to be an artist of the world, a truly international artist from Toronto. Thank you.
In his 1958 book, Culture and Society, Raymond Williams wrote, "Art has come to mean a special truth, imaginative truth. An artist is a special kind of person." In my own clumsy way, clumsier, artists think, make things, and can have a presence. A moment. Close to 13 years ago, I returned to Australia at the invitation of a friend, artist, educator, advocate Alan Giddy, who was to co-curate an exhibition of cited and site-specific works at the Newington Armoury, which is not a gallery, but had been repurposed on what was the grounds with the Olympic Park, Sydney Olympic Park. Alan asked me to write preface for the publication, print matter. In the spirit of the project, which was art and artists and a special kind of, I quoted Michael Snow. It's the end of the quotes that you just heard, Paul and from the film. I clipped it. "Beyond the rules lies radical art." But I used it as a graphic, red type over an inverted photograph, black and white photograph of David Bourdieu and Vladimir Mayakovsky, who were radicals in their place, in their time, in the second decade of the 20th century. One day, I was standing at the top of a berm for the reinforcing wall of the armory, and standing next to Martin Sims, one of the artists, who I didn't really know. I had met him. We looked out, turned to me and said, "Michael Snow's films were very important to me. This is not the first time Michael's films came up in conversation in Australia." I didn't ask Martin why, what was important, and if you saw Martin's work, you would not necessarily see anything of Michael. Well, Martin wasn't a copyist, and neither was Michael. So, on that day, looking out, where 200 years ago there had been mud flats and mangroves, and for 20,000 years or more, home of Aboriginal people in that part of what is now New South Wales, Michael's presence came to me. Thank you.
Hello. I'm eternally grateful that Michael was the special presence in my life that he was. I'm honored and happy to have known him as an artistic hero, a mentor, a collaborator, a great studio boss, and a friend. Michael drew from a deep well a universe of creativity, and his propensity for new thoughts and ideas was part of his magnetism. His work always includes the audience's own presence as part of the experience of the work, creating the space to sense your own perception. And practicing our perception is a path towards understanding. I approached Michael as a teenaged, aspiring artist, and he encouragingly embraced me as a colleague and fellow practitioner. It's easy to remember when I first met Michael because I was 17 years old then, and he being 71 at the time. Michael was delighted by the palindromic symmetry of our ages. The way Michael prioritized even the simplest pleasures led to a preponderance of small laughs to go along with the abundance of unique sights, sounds, and memories. My favorite memory is from 2019, when Michael and I created a sound cinema performance at London's Tate Modern, using the cinema's array of 47 speakers to create an immersive sonic space. Michael wanted to apply the sine wave sound from his 1967 film Wavelength to this acoustic zone. So we dug out the original quarter-inch tape recording of the glissando sine wave, then transferred and chopped the recording into fragments that we played on samplers in real time, along with the live audience in the cinema. A video projection of a sunset reflecting in the waves of a lapping lake formed a natural and durational fade to black, while the sounds of rising tones layered upon each other from every direction. Soon we were submersed, fully swimming in the sounds that we were playing. It was glorious and joyous to hear and to create and to be in that space together. But I talk about this work here not just for my happy memory. This piece was titled by Michael as Wavelength, but spelled W-A-I-V-E. And I sensed that he was preparing for his time to come, to relinquish and to let go. In 2019, Michael also created Cityscape, an IMAX film capturing Toronto's waterfront skyline from the vantage point of the Toronto Islands, using camera motion to create a distinctive portrait of the place where he was born and where he died. Michael's final work, my mother's collection of photographs, similarly leads to an end. The book covers a lot of ground and functions as a loving tribute to his mother and their family history. But in its essence, the book is a gesture towards his source. These last three works by Michael make me proud of him as a friend, as his friend. Through his creative practice, he was able to author the end of his own experience. Thank you, Michael, for the energy you beamed to us all.
I'm honored to be here and also actually relieved because I drove up here on Tuesday in that awful storm. I was actually thinking, will I make it? And also, I want to mention my wife too, Karen McCormack, who's here, and is a very apposite guest because Karen was the editor of the Michael Snow project that the AGO did. And I wanted to mention that. 3 minutes, that's not enough time to boil a soft-boiled egg. So I've got what I was going to say, but one thing I wanted to say, and it was partly to do with what Alina said, was Michael's reputation outside Canada. And I do want to mention France and the Pompidou Center and the French embrace of Michael's work, and particularly one person, Jean-François Lyotard, the great philosopher, who embraced his work, particularly his film work and the temporality within that in an amazing way. And one work of Michael's that he did was the cover of the Semiotext magazine special issue of Lyotard's, which was Lyotard's text and these beautiful plasticine figures that Michael did on them. I thought what I would limit it myself tonight, I basically did 3 collaborations with Michael. One was in 1977 in Calgary. One was in 1991 when I was actually in the film Le Voici and Who Died During the Terror. And the one I want to talk about is my 1996 collaboration with Michael, and it's all around you. It's the figure of the beautiful walking woman. I think you should have an image up. Okay, there it is. what you're looking at is the 1962 Alice. And I want to just give you the background to how this came around. Michael actually had very little to do with this, other than choosing the text, but I was invited by Robert Bertolf, the curator of the University of Buffalo, to do their annual Christmas broadside. It's now become a holiday broadside. But the whole idea was that you would be invited a poet, and the poet would then invite a contemporary artist to do a parallel painting to it. I had not written the text, and I said instantly, let's make this all Canadian. And I phoned Michael, and I said, I want one of the walking women. I moved to Canada in 1968 and really got to know Michael's work around about 70. And this was an icon in the 70s, and it continues to be an icon. The Walking Woman is such an amazing work. As we were getting this together, there was a wonderful misunderstanding in which I said to Michael, I want this because it is such a fantastic achievement of pedestrian art. And Michael took it with great umbrage as the wrong way around, as if I say, look, this is like shitty, this is something like a school kid could do. And I quickly corrected, and I said, Michael, what I really meant by pedestrian was perambulatory. And I wanted to talk about him, that this is a revolution in collage, because, and paradox, because you get the walking woman who's then put on platforms of train stations and in buildings when everybody is walking except the walking woman. And I thought it was a wonderful work. And then Michael came around to see that. And my challenge was to come up with a poem that's a response to that. And I looked at it, and what is amazing about this is on weathered paper collage. And I said, this is not just the walking woman, but there's hydraulics, there is water here, there's the walking woman beneath the water. And I've never actually written a poem as a direct response to a painting, and this is what I did. It's called Prior to Meaning. I called it Prior to Meaning because I didn't know the meaning of the painting until the words came out. And I know the Renaissance has been mentioned tonight, and what I mentioned to Michael about this was that really you're going back to the sister arts, to where the painting is the silent poem and the poem is the speaking picture. And I wanted the poem to be this. And also, like, how do you make this relevant to the nativity? Because this is a Christmas broadside. And I thought, the iconologies that you get of Christmas is basically, baby Jesus in a manger, Mary over him, you get a sheep and a car. But really the most important thing about that was the walking of the shepherds, the walking of Joseph and Mary actually to Bethlehem, and the walking of the three wise men. So I thought this fit into it very well. If you look on the poem, there's a superfluity of brackets. And what I try to do within that is actually get some of the inflections and the curves within image and really give them as a kind of an absorption into the poem themselves. And so, as well as a response to Michael's walking woman, the picture itself is also embedded within the poem. The poem goes, lost listening to paint, a whiter odorlesque inside encounters notation, the specific instances of angels or tugboats in a struggle, so absence over surface is the stream that's never there. Connoisseurship flooded in saintly deixis, a contradiction to a proof that I had brought you joy and you returned it as a coming outside. Historical relations are the traveller's tongues on this Thursday or November, between a manger on a patio and having lost a destiny to feel that dream to need. So thank you.
At first, as we watch La Région Centrale, we are carried along with the flow, identify with the camera apparatus as it surveys the landscape and transits from earth to sky, from sky to earth, from day to night. Snow said, "I wanted to make a distillation of an entire day. It starts in the early morning and it ends in the early morning. It's cyclical. The planet moves in a cycle, and I wanted the film to be cyclical too. Its subjects are the sun, earth, and moon." However, a split in consciousness develops as one begins to experience oneself experiencing the film internally. This flip in consciousness is a common feature of aesthetic experience that Snow's art radicalized. This radicalization was what made Wavelengths so transformative. This split in consciousness is paired with another, a dual manner of experiencing the earth. Sometimes we see it as though we are watching from the earth as the camera moves in its cycles, but sometimes it is as though we are in the sky looking down at the earth. Annette Michelson commented on this duality, noting that, quote, "the disembodied mobility of the eye subject is hyperbolized in La Région Centrale, and it is the spectator as lone center and as transcendental subject," unquote. She also pointed out that La Région Centrale was created following the most intensive period of America's space program. Marshall McLuhan, too, understood that technological development centering at NASA transformed our conception of the planet. When Sputnik went around the planet became programmable content and thus became an art form. Ecology was born and nature was obsolesced. The concept of planetary ecology came into play. At the speed of light, man is disincarnate, and disincarnate man is freed of natural law. Emancipation from natural law makes man greater than the angels. He can be everything, everywhere at once, but they are subject to the limitations of space and can only be in one space at a time. That was all a quotation from McLuhan. The impersonal, transpersonal, superpersonal vantage point, the inapprehensible vantage point of the transcendental ego, brought forth the world as the earth as an ecosystem, within a galactic ecosystem, within a universal ecosystems. These cycles of different ecosystems suggests a neo-Pythagoreanism that affiliates Snow's art with that of Hollis Frampton, Robert Freer, Harry Smith, and Jock MacDonald, all works informed by the spiritual rhythm and cosmic order that rules the universe. But this is another formal radicalization of a phenomenal feature of aesthetic experience that Snow, in common with other minimalists, highlighted: the paradoxes around simultaneously looking inward and outward, of aesthetic objects being simultaneously ideal and objective. Visual artists often encapsulated these paradoxes visually in the image of a subject seen both in through a window and looking out the window. Snow brought this theme to a sort of culmination with Solar Breath, Northern Caryatids, which, like others of Snow's work, deploying the window theme, joins the paradoxes of interiority and exteriority with the fusion of choice and chance. To this, Solar Breath adds another duality, solar and lunar breathing, left and right nostril breathing, which involves drawing the outside inside and expelling the inner into the outside. The ubiquity of Snow's presence in the Toronto art scene made it seem an essentially transpersonal, superpersonal vantage point, so that many of us, when we were making our films or writings, internalized, that the ubiquity of Snow's presence in the Toronto art scene made it seem an essentially transpersonal, superpersonal vantage point, that many of us, when we were making films or writings, internalized. So we asked ourselves what he would make of what we were doing. It was a potent influence.
Well, I didn't prepare anything because everybody else has done such a wonderful job. But I definitely didn't want to be simply an audience member. I've been Michael's partner for more or less, depending on how you count, 45 years. And it was really fun. He was a wonderful man, a wonderful father. Well, we all know he was a wonderful artist. So welcome everybody, or whatever, I guess welcome is still okay. We're all still here. But it's been very fine to have all this review and all this love coming back. And I think we all have different views of Michael, obviously. You know, some of us know him more than others. But I'm glad to have the last word. And now my role is to tell you that, checking my, the slideshow will continue. The bar will be open until 8:45. At 9 o'clock, we're officially over, and you have to all leave by 9:30.